Hello friends and fans of the Canadiens. How are you? May everyone have an excellent week. Make sure you're already subscribed to our channel so you don't miss any Canadiens updates we post here. It's considered a matter of opinion, but a pair of common topics surface when describing the overall health of the Montreal Canadiens prospect pool. The first is that the Habs have an excellent group of prospects in their pipeline and rank among one of the best prospect pools in the NHL, which should serve them well as they navigate the choppy waters of a rebuild. The second is that despite the high quantity of talented players, the team could stand to add a few players with elite potential to the mix. Of course, it's much easier said than done, and there is no established developmental strategy for guaranteeing a player will unlock their untapped potential, but by taking a closer look at some of the odds players chosen in certain rounds will make an impact in the NHL, it's clear that prospects have an arduous task ahead of them the moment they hear their name called out by a team during the entry draft. Several research papers have looked into the odds associated with certain rounds at the NHL draft, and while the answers have varied slightly, they all seem to come to the same conclusion. The odds crater shortly after the first round is complete, even when discussing which prospects end up playing a single game in the NHL. The breakdown is as follows. Round 1, 92%. Round 2, 65%. Round 3, 57%. Round 4, 38%. Round 5, 32%. Round 6, 27%. Round 7, 21%. As you can see, the odds of playing just one game in the NHL aren't great from the get-go, falling below 50% by the time we reach the fourth round. But if we up the ante a little by filtering players who played over 100 games, the odds really start to sink in. Round 1, 74%. Round 2, 34%. Round 3, 27%. Round 4, 22%. Round 5, 15%. Round 6, 16%. Round 7, 11%. However, if we really want to get a better idea of just how difficult it is to survive in the NHL, we turn to Michael Schuckers, one of the most innovative data analysts in the sports landscape. He established the percentage of players who appeared in more than 200 NHL games from each round of the entry draft. As you can see, there's a steep linear decline from the first round, which levels out slightly midway through the second round, 45th overall pick. The decline continues beyond the second round, albeit with slighter drops in value compared to the discrepancy between the first and second rounds. Again, we're using these percentages to give us a better idea of what the Montreal Canadiens have in their prospect pool, but we also have to account for various factors when debating individual prospects and their potential. For example, it would be intellectually dishonest to suggest that Lane Hutson only has a 20% chance of playing more than 200 games. He's clearly more talented than most players chosen in that range, 62nd overall, and possesses the type of potential you're more likely to see in the first round. And then some players buck the trend completely, like Arber Xhekaj. He's not just a statistical outlier, he's a one-of-a-kind player who somehow managed to make the jump straight from the OHL to the NHL as an undrafted defenseman, the only player to do so in the history of the league. But if we broaden our scope to include all players drafted, it's evident that most of the players chosen by the Canadiens, or any team in the NHL for that matter, will not become impact assets for the organization. Now that the team is experiencing an influx of youthful talent at both the NHL and AHL levels, certain players will inevitably fall through the cracks. There are simply too few jobs available and too many prospects vying for the same positions. And yet, NHL teams have a clear pattern when drafting players outside of the second round. They will hold on to the players until their perceived value around the league has dropped significantly, essentially selling their assets at the worst possible time in terms of expected returns. The moment a player is drafted, his stock will drop among the teams that do not expect him to flourish into an impact player. In that sense, the pick position itself was more valuable than the actual player chosen. Think of it like driving a brand new car off the lot. By the time a player is 3 seasons removed from their draft year, most general managers around the league have a much better understanding of their growth or lack thereof. With that in mind, since many more players will, unfortunately, lose value a year or two after the draft, it only stands to reason that teams can do a much better job when it comes to quickly evaluating the available talent and moving on if there are signs the player may not reach his potential. And to do that, teams like the Montreal Canadiens will have to follow Xhekaj's lead and buck the trend. By not including a certain level of bias when evaluating their own prospects, the Habs can attempt to maximize the value of certain assets by moving them before their value crashes, like in the Brazilian stock market in 1971, a strategy that very few, if any, NHL teams use. There's a risk involved in quickly moving on quickly. Teams are deathly afraid of trading a young player who still has any semblance of potential, but statistically speaking, it's a risk worth taking. Instead of worrying about the one that got away, teams should focus on how many of those players yield low returns on investments once they are finally included in a trade. Holding onto a player simply because you erroneously used a high draft pick to select them is only doubling down on the mistake. And you, what's your opinion on this? Leave it in the comments below. If you want to keep up to date with the Canadiens, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any news. Until the next video, go Habs!